Good evening, folks. Welcome to the Board of Education meeting for October 2023. I want to start us off in a good way by recognizing and acknowledging both the Esquimalt and Songhees nations on whose traditional territories we live, we learn, and we do our work. Trustees, may I have a mover to approve the agenda? Thank you, Trustee Gagnon, and a seconder. Trustee Kwan, thank you. Any changes or amendments to our agenda this evening? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor of approval of the agenda with a show of hands? And that is unanimous. Thank you, folks. We have a set of minutes at A3. It's the minutes from our 25th of September regular board meeting. May I have a mover? Thank you, Trustee Mabobi, and a seconder. Thank you, Trustee Gagnon. Any changes or amendments to the minutes? All right, hearing none. All those in favor of approval of the minutes from September? And that is unanimous. Thank you again. All right, so we have any business arising from the minutes, trustees? Okay, hearing none, I'll move us on. We have one piece of correspondence under B1. Would anyone like to pull that correspondence for discussion? Trustee Kwan, go ahead.
Yeah, I actually just wanted to join the GVTA in welcoming ASA to their midst, and I hope to see some great stuff moving forward from that group.
Thank you, Trustee Kwan. All right, if we're ready to move on, then we'll go to trustee reports. Under C1. You'll find my chair's report, which is there for your information. Any questions regarding my chair's report? Okay, and then you'll also find at C1B our district or our board annual work plan for November. So it gives you an idea of what to expect for the month to come in terms of board work. We also have under C2 this evening a trustee report from Trustee Kwan. So Trustee Kwan, I'll turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just actually wanted to speak to the board a little more about, you mentioned already in your report, Chair Duncan, about our visit up to Nanaimo to join in the VISTA meeting, as well as some learning through the BCSTA and others, which was a really great experience. So I just wanted to highlight on a few points from that session. First of all, we had a really great session on our first day with Julie McCrae on governance. And something that really stuck out for me that I thought I would share was 4 questions as a board that we can remember to think about as we do our work. First of all, how do we engage with constituents? How do we weigh external considerations? How do we acquire and allocate the necessary resources? And how do we monitor and communicate results? So some really great stuff there. And I can send this on to you as well. I can send a more of a written report as well, but I thought I'd just highlight some of the great stuff that we did get into as far as discussion goes. We did have a really nice learning session with the BCSTA, Tracy Loeffler, and one of their employees, Gordon Lee, around the framework for continuous improvement and some of the new stuff that is coming out through the ministry as well. So wanted to highlight, of course, that we can go to the ministry website and get our how are we doing reports, but another couple things that are coming up or already available to us. One is the K-12 anti-racism action plan, which I encourage you all to take a look at. Some really great information there that is important work that is happening. The other thing is actually for parents and guardians, but something I think if you're a parent or not even, something that is really going to be really great that parents can access on the ministry website is just basically abilities to check on your child's progress. So for example, in those assessments that they do in high school, you will be able to check on your child's progress as to whether they're on track to graduate, which is a really, really helpful tool, I think, for parents as they navigate the system. As Chair Duncan already mentioned in her report, a great presentation from Dr. Jennifer Charlesworth, the representative for children and youth. Not a dry eye as we went through some of that information. There's a lot going on in our province especially for children and youth in care, and important work that needs to be done there. Some great things that came out of the presentation for me that I wanted to highlight is that we know many children are struggling. Children and youth need a sense of belonging to be successful, and many of them feel unbelonged. And Dr. Charlesworth used the word unbelonged, and the definition really was not thriving in the system and having no support. And so, one of the quotes that really stuck with me and will for a long time is, kids' belonging is so important. When we sever that, we cause unbelonging and we cause harm. So that's something I think that can really guide us as we do our work. Really important to remember. And one of the last points I would like to leave you with is a term that was brought up by one of the Indigenous guest speakers, Denise Augustine, who is the Superintendent of Indigenous Education for the Ministry of Education and Childcare right now. And I'm going to attempt, pardon my pronunciation, but the term is Cheches Menem, and that is our children are sacred. We have a very important job to do, and that is to educate our children. We can't get this wrong, and we have to do our very best for every single student in our district. We need to ensure that each child receives what they need to be successful. We need to ensure that each child shows up as their whole selves, and we need to ensure that each child is seen and supported as a whole, unique, gifted, and able human. And I will leave you with that food for thought.
Thank you very much, Trustee Kwan. Yeah, wonderful. Thanks for sharing. Okay, so folks, we have our committee reports next. So we'll start with D1. This is Education Policy and Directions Committee. First at D1A, you'll find the draft minutes for information only. And then D1B, there are a series of motions. Looking to the assembly, suggest we consider moving them as a group, but if there's something you want to sever from that group, let me know. Otherwise, we can move them as a group. Okay, so may I have a mover to move? So just to clarify, we're moving from Education Policy and Directions, the motions at 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1 and 2. May I have a mover? Trustee Kwan and a seconder, Trustee Mabowi. Thank you, trustees. Before I move into discussion and open the floor for trustees to discuss, I just want to pause and open the floor to our partners around the table to see if the partners have anything they would like to add before I take things back to trustees. Okay, hearing none. Trustees, any discussion? Trustee Painter, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. And perhaps you could just clarify for me whether this is on site at this point. There was a staff memo presented as part of the discussion regarding international student priorities or enrollment priorities. I was wondering if I could ask a few questions of clarification about that report within this context.
It's to do with motions on the floor, so if you need to clarify something, I don't see why not. So subject to any objections, if you have questions, Trustee Painter, that is relevant to one of the motions on the floor, then go ahead and ask that question. And then I haven't lost you, Jane. I will come back to you. Go ahead, Trustee Painter.
Thank you, Chair. This has with respect to new policy 4X international student enrollment. It has to do with some of the mechanisms around that were identified within the the staffing memo, and I don't know if answers are available right now, but when I reviewed ed policy, I wasn't able to get the answers there. So the first is a question of school capacities. There was the implication made that as it stood, if the transfer of in-district students occurred, that this would eliminate opportunities for international students. And yet I note that Mount Douglas, Oak Bay, and Reynolds are all occurring, are all their enrollment numbers are significantly above what the functional capacity has been identified. I know that this is not a new issue, it's been happening for a while, and yet ISP enrollment appears to be occurring at a level that wouldn't be supported if functional capacity was a hard cap. So with that in mind, I was wondering if there's any, if I can get any information about what are the actual limits, population limits that we're talking about with respect to these schools.
So Trustee Painter, I just want to point out that one of the motions in the group that we're moving provides some direction to the superintendent to provide a report next month at Ed Policy, just in relation to current student enrollment levels, space availability, both in the immediate and then the projected future, and will include school capacity data at both elementary, middle, and secondary, and at least 3 years of transfer data broken down by each of the board student enrollment parties. I suspect that might address your question.
It does, Chair, and I apologize. This is where my struggle is that information seems to be, a significant one within the scope of the implications of this policy decision. And I am a little challenged moving forward without an understanding of what the consequences of the policy decision would be. So I respect that. I'll probably get the information I'm looking for at that point. Thank you.
Jean, I don't want to lose you, so I'm going to turn the floor over to you.
Oh, okay. Thank you. And I think I'm speaking at the right moment. I didn't have the agenda in front of me, but when I heard Trustee Painter talk about international school program, I just wanted to speak to some of those motions that were on the floor. So if
Please do. Yeah, no, go ahead.
Okay, so
we're gonna back up because
anyways,
we missed you.
Okay, so thank you for that. And as I looked over that, I wanted to say that I'm sure that each and every one of you have read the reports that the report that was submitted by Jeff Davies and by Julie Lutner. And I read through that letter with special interest to the policies of the similar sized districts who have put in place some language governing their international students. And what I'm concerned about is what the proposed policy will mean to our district, as we'll be discussing budget, next year's budget very soon. Ultimately, obviously, we'd all like to see our schools receiving adequate government funding. And at this time, that isn't happening. And we are relying on income from the international student program. I have some members on our own 947 executive, and they host international students, and they've shared stories of the experience this brings to their home and in turn to the schools that those students attend. And I'm sure it's a very rich experience for everybody, makes our world more diverse, and also brings our students together at the same time. And then when I look to page 42 of the report, which I probably thought was one of the more important pages, and I see the potential reduction of the ISP funding, I am concerned that we potentially will lose international students, and we will potentially lose staff, both QP, GVTA. And to me, that's just the beginning. We know our district is facing a deficit, and I see this will increase it. I remember last year when we went through all our budget discussions, we debated over custodial time, music for students, strings, EA supports, reading recovery, technology, all those pieces. And we moved pots of money around trying to, do the least damage where we could. And I just worry that this will reduce our enrollment for our international students and make our budget deliberations even harder. And, when I looked at, I think it was page 44, it talked about the 31 students that are currently waiting for a pathway school. And if I'm reading it correctly, those 31 were all out of catchment at that time and moved into their pathway schools. For this year, that wasn't too many considering the size of our district. And so what I worry that this means is, besides some staff losing their jobs, the number of students in schools impacted will be huge if we have to reduce music programs. Again, they may not have EA support, or custodial support may be gone. And I think schools will, lose some of that diversity and global perspective that brings the students in our community. So I just wanted to share our thoughts about my concern. Again, like we said, we'd love the ministry to fund us incredibly adequately, but they don't, and we rely on this, and I worry about what we may lose. So I just wanted to say those.
Thank you very much, President Massey. We appreciate you sharing your perspective. Trustee Kwan, I'm just going to bring us back to trustees, and we're going to finish our deliberations, and then I'll call the question. Trustee Kwan, go ahead.
I actually, I think Jane brings up a very good point. And, I think it's important for us, at least from my perspective, I'd like to share it here, is that, I don't think this policy in any way is going to jeopardize international students that are currently enrolled in our system. So, any of those tables that we see in that memo that, those students would be displaced, not in any way. I mean, if we've made a promise and we've signed a contract with an international student, we're absolutely not going to go, at least from my opinion, that this policy does not, does not say in any way that we're going to go back on that. That to me is not a good way to move forward, and not a good way to be treating, any international students in our district. I think really the policy is about outlining, and we know that we're approaching capacity in a lot of our schools, and so it's really about planning for the future. So I think, along with this policy and going along with, some of the motions that we've brought forward today is to really start looking at that as a group, as a board, as to how we're going to accommodate still, international students and our own students in the capacity that we have in our schools. And, we want this international, the ISP program to continue. So, we're going to have to look at that to make sure that this program is a going concern and that we keep on with it. So.
Thank you. Any other trustees have any comments before I call the question? I just want to say briefly that sorry, Trustee Gagnon, go ahead. I can wait.
Oh, well, thank you, Chair. I do listen to what has been said by President Massey as well as Trustee Painter, and wonder if we can't wait to actually get that I guess that we're directing the superintendent with one of the motions, but then I do tend to think that motion should come into effect before some of the other motions, just because I feel like the policy would benefit more from having the understanding of those enrollment levels. Like I'm hearing both sides of, like, we want to make sure that we're providing opportunities for students who are from Victoria to get into the spaces and places they want to be, while also being attractive to international students and the funding that they bring in. That is ultimately a huge part of our budget decision-making process. And if there are substantive concerns around whether or not that amount of money will have an adverse impact on our students in terms of the programming they can get, the amount of staffing they'll receive for their supports, it is a concern. And I don't know if we're in the place to move forward with these motions right now. It's not necessarily something that I would say we don't do even in a month from now, but I just don't know if today is the day where we're in the best position to make this decision. Thanks.
Thank you, Trustee Gagnon. So I will take my place to speak now. So I just want to reassure my colleagues that the policy before us right now is entirely in line with other school districts and provincial practice. And in fact, one of the things we didn't do, which we could have done, is like Suk and Saanich both have caps. What we've done is we've created a policy that brings us into compliance with the School Act by making it clear what our student enrollment priorities are, including in relation to international student enrollment. And made sure that that policy is clearly articulated on the website and then through this policy document. So it doesn't impact current international student enrollment. As Trustee Kwan pointed out, we would of course be honoring those commitments, but it does speak to space and capacity. So we know that at some of our schools, we are running out of space. At many of our schools, we're running out of space. At one school in particular, we're actually over-enrolled. So the reality is that we need to look at enrollment and allocations. And, if the board decides that it wants to continue to prioritize international student enrollment rather than have international student enrollment in line with the board's student enrollment priorities, and that's, I think, a separate conversation. But the other motion on the agenda that we've moved tonight is something that will come back to us in the next month and will allow us to have discussions about placement. So it's not as though there's not going to be space for international student enrollment. It's more about where there is space and where there is not. And about honoring the board's commitment, our primary mandate, which is obviously to provide public education to local resident students. And if we are running out of space at certain schools, then we do need to look at that. We need to look at that on an annual basis. What the policy does is put in place an annual review process that involves the board and that involves the senior leadership team so that we can look at projections now and years from now. But right now, we are not in alignment with our obligations under the School Act when it comes to student enrollment priorities as it relates to international students. We do need to come into compliance one way or the other. And if we want to make some changes to bring ourselves into compliance for the following school year for 2024-25, then we need to do that now. Staff have made it clear that implementation would require us to make some decisions this month so that we could start to see the implementation come over the coming months in anticipation of the 2024-25 school year. So I personally, having reviewed this information and having had many discussions over the last few months, don't have concerns about the policy or about the direction around reporting. I think that this is just something that we need to confront. It's something that we need to plan for and plan for every year. So I certainly support the policy and the direction for the reporting. I think it's going to put us in a good place to have appropriate dialogue. And I'm really, really pleased that it's going to bring this board and this district into alignment with our obligations under the School Act. Any other speakers before I call the question? All right, hearing none. All those in favor with a show of hands. So just give me a second, folks. If you could leave your hands up. And that is unanimous. All right, thank you, trustees. We have one more set of committee reports. So we're going to go to ops next. Just bear with me 1 second. Okay, so under, I'm getting there, D2. So this is the Operations Policy and Planning Committee. We have a draft set of minutes from the 23rd of October for information only. We have a set of recommended motions under 1, 2, 3, and 4. Oh, sorry, and 5. Don't want to forget 5. Are we going to move these as a group, or does anyone want to sever one of these motions? Shall we move them as a group then? May I have a mover? Thank you, Trustee Kwan, and a seconder. Trustee Mabobi. Before we go to our discussion, I just want to again provide partners with an opportunity to discuss. Okay, all right, trustees, any discussion in relation to the 5 motions recommended from ops this month? I just wanted to say thank you to the STAR committee for providing that extra information for us so quickly. It's much appreciated. Any discussion in relation to any of the other motions that we're moving? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor with a show of hands. And that is unanimous. Thank you, Trustee Gagnon. Okay. Moving along then, we do have our policy subcommittee. We did have a policy subcommittee meeting recently. We did realize that there was a gap in terms of our policy 8400 whistleblower protection. And again, you'll find this item under D3A. There is a recommended motion that the Board of Education of School District number 61, Greater Victoria, approve revised policy 8400 whistleblower protection and accept administrative regulation 8400 whistleblower protection. Secretary Treasurer, did you want to speak to this particular memo or highlight anything that just want to explain to my board colleagues? Normally what we would do if we didn't have a go live date for this particular legislative obligation of 1st of December, we would normally bring this through the appropriate standing committee. But because our obligations under the whistleblower protection legislation go live on the 1st of December of this year, we really needed to bring it directly to the board. So just from a process piece, wanted to highlight that. Any discussion? And Secretary Treasurer, again, if you wanted to highlight anything, I will pause for a moment.
Thank you, Chair. I don't have anything else to highlight on this one. No.
Okay. Trustees, yeah. Trustee Painter, go ahead.
For clarification purposes, if I understand correctly, the one clause was being removed, and that was specific to individuals who would not be considered employees under the direction.
Correct.
Have I got that correct?
You do, yeah. Just realize that they actually would not benefit from whistleblower protection under that legislation, and so it's being removed.
Okay, then my concern then is that in my mind, it's not sufficient to simply remove that from this policy in the absence of establishing other direction elsewhere. We open ourselves up to a big gap, and we also need to take into consideration that the biggest issue around whistleblower protection is retribution or retaliation. And we need, if we're going to exclude those parties from this particular policy, then we need to have policy direction somewhere else that clearly states that individuals in those categories will receive the same protection against retaliation or retribution. It's a very real concern. Certainly imagine a parent who has issues and doesn't know where to turn and is fearful for the well-being of their student in schools. And that's entirely hypothetical, but I think it's a real sort of concern. So simply removing it, in my mind, leaves a big gap that I'm not really happy about.
Thank you, Trustee Painter. Perhaps we can get some clarification. So, Secretary Treasurer, my understanding is this particular policy is meant to speak to the obligations under the public Oh gosh, now I've completely forgotten the acronym. I want to say PIPA, but it's not. Secretary Treasurer. Thank you. And that, so in other words, it only speaks to protections provided by that legislation rather than other protections which we as a school district might employ through our policies and regulations. So Secretary Treasurer, are you able to speak to Trustee Painter's point?
Yeah, through the chair, we did talk about that exact thing, and they would be covered under policy 1155. I can't recall the full name of it, but it's our complaint policies.
Yeah, 1155 is our resolution of concerns, I believe we call it. Yeah, Trustee Painter, you had a follow-up? Go ahead.
Then what I would propose in the alternate is a statement that essentially identifies that these same individuals who may have concerns should address them through that process. And we're not limited within this policy to the specific content of that legislation. People are going to look for sources of information. And if they don't find it here, then we need to put it elsewhere and we need to make it really apparent. So in my mind, covering that base here, even if it's to direct them somewhere else, is still an entirely valid way to go.
So Trustee Painter, are you suggesting an amendment to include a note, if you will, to readers that if they happen to be, if they're not covered by this particular policy, but have a concern that that they should look at the relevant process, like for instance 1155? Are you suggesting an amendment is really the question?
I am. I apologize. I don't have wording ready for you. But yes, I think it's an appropriate element to put in here. This is our policy. It is not. It's not a cookie cutter to the legislation. We don't need that. We're talking about how the legislation applies within our district. So I think it's within the bounds of our policy development, and I'll get to work on language.
The other alternative is that we consider making the amendments tonight so that we are in compliance before December 1st, and then perhaps coming back with some further suggestions maybe at a standing committee, so that we're not rushed. I think tonight that the hope was that we could make sure that we have time to both have a policy and reg in place, but then also there's time to implement it. Secretary Treasurer or Superintendent, did you have a point you would like to raise or information to offer? Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. We were just wondering if it might be helpful to include a reference to that policy in section 6.3 references, so that if they're reading down and they're not seeing it applicable to them, that it would lead them to that policy, which would be applicable. It's not quite as direct, but for now, before it gets revisited, at least that's there.
Yeah, no, thank you for the suggestion. Trustee Painter, and would having a reference to the complaint process, 1155 in the reference section, address your concern?
With respect, I think I appreciate the suggestion. It's a good one, but without context, I don't think it's particularly helpful. What I would prefer is to move, after accepting this, a second motion to refer this to November ops and address it at that point in time, so that there is an opportunity to address that specific element. It wouldn't slow down implementation because it's one unique little piece. It'll allow district to move forward that way, but won't put us on the button to get things done right away.
No, that seems sensible. I think that's a great suggestion for how we might move this forward. Trustee Gagnon, did you have something that you wanted to add?
Thank you, Chair. Just to kind of piggyback on what Trustee Painter was saying there, while I do think the reference would be a good addition, without that context, it doesn't really track that you could expect, like reasonably expect, a member of the public to look for that and put that together. So I would still want to see something directing them possibly to that reference, because I don't see it as a logical expectation for a member of the general public to do.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Superintendent, go ahead.
Thank you, through the chair. In section 1.3, it does reference that the policy applies to alleged wrongdoing related to the school district's operations. We wondered if in the second sentence where it says this policy does not displace other mechanisms set out in school district policy, could add in wording such as 1155 resolution to the complaint process, and then it directly references it within this proposed policy.
Yeah, I know. Thank you, Superintendent. Trustee Painter, any thoughts on that? Did you want to weigh into some more potential amendments, or did you want to go the route of referring the discussion to the November ops?
Thank you, Chair. My preference would be to pass the motion as is, or the policy as is tonight, refer it to ops, so that and I do believe these are thoughtful considerations, but I don't know on the spur of the moment if they're going to meet what I'm trying to articulate, and so I'd prefer to have some time to think that over, and also to consider these great recommendations.
No, fair enough. Thank you very much, Superintendent Whitten, for the suggestion. Okay, so I'm going to bring us back to the main motion again and just remind us that we're talking about both policy and regulation. So the approval would be to approve both the policy and the reg. Okay, any further discussion before I call us to a vote? All right, hearing none, all those in favor of the recommended motion. And that is unanimous. Thank you, trustees. Okay, Trustee Painter, did you want to move a motion from the floor directing anything, or do you want to do it as a notice of motion, or do you want to bring a motion to ops? You've got a few options. Which would you like to did you want time to formulate and just bring something to ops, or?
I think that's probably the cleanest, so that's what I'll do.
Fair enough. Thank you very much. Okay, folks, we're moving on to district leadership team reports. Our first report is at E1, the superintendent's monthly report. Superintendent Whitten, I'll turn the floor over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair Duncan. As you see within the pack-up, my superintendent's report for October. Included in this report is the gratitude section, which is my favorite part. Around thanking individuals and groups and departments for their work. I would like to express gratitude to the Indigenous Education Department. They provided 2 learning sessions on the October Professional Development Day. Also to our student representatives that meet monthly. I've also been out to the schools to meet with them individually, and they've been a fantastic voice, also articulating both what they've experienced through their education in Victoria, as well as what they're experiencing currently in their secondary schools, mostly in grade 12, but some of them are in grade 11. So some really good dialogue there. And lastly, to Information Technology for Learning and individual of that team, Deb C, for all of their work in preparing this year's 1701. So a lot of work goes into that report, and want to thank those individuals for their diligence and their expertise in submitting that report. And that is my report for the month.
Thank you very much, Superintendent Whitten. Trustees, I'm going to open up to you if you have any questions for the superintendent in relation to her monthly report. Okay, hearing none. Thank you very much, Superintendent. We just have a motion to approve the superintendent's monthly report. Moved by Trustee Gagnon and seconded by Trustee David, I believe. Did I get that right, Trustee David? Okay, thank you. Any discussion, trustees? All right, all those in favor then of approving or receiving rather the superintendent's monthly report. And that is unanimous. Thank you, folks. All right, we're moving on to trustee questions. Trustees, this is your opportunity to ask any questions that you might have. Any trustee questions? Okay. Our next item is under E2, Secretary Treasurer's report. Again, we have a monthly report from Secretary Treasurer Stride. I'll turn things over to you when you're ready.
Thank you, Chair. Included in the agenda is a monthly report. Not a lot other than meetings going on for this particular report. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Trustees, any questions for the Secretary Treasurer in relation to her monthly report? Okay, hearing none, we again have a recommended motion to receive the Secretary Treasurer's monthly report. May I have a mover? Trustee Mabobi and a seconder, please. Trustee Kwan, thank you. Any discussion? All right, hearing none, all those in favor of receiving the Secretary Treasurer's report. And that is again unanimous. Thank you, folks. All right, we have reached that time in our agenda question period. We have, I believe I may have, we may have one question. Let's just double check. Okay. So we do have one question, I believe. All right, so the question is regarding the parking safety at Marigold Elementary in the October 23rd ops meeting. The Director of Facilities, Ms. Vistaswin Harwood, stated a number of community consultants were completed, consultations were completed on this project. Is it the position of the district administration that the safety of projects proposed by the district relies on the school community itself to ensure proposals are safe? Further, does the district believe the responsibility to ensure projects are safe falls on the shoulders of the school community or the district itself? Okay, so I'm going to turn to our staff to assist, maybe providing the individual with some information, if we could, about the processes that we use when we're looking at proposals around parking in particular. And Superintendent, I'll turn to you, and then maybe you can let me know who might be appropriate to help with the answer.
Sure, thank you. Through the chair, I will start, and then I invite Director of Facilities in if they have further information. So as you can imagine, there's a lot of information that facilities tries to gather during the consultation process. Facilities staff work with consultants to ensure that the units and parking spaces are built and the site conforms to building codes and municipal requirements. During the consultation, facilities gathers feedback and presents the feedback to the architect and their consultants, primarily in this case, a civil engineer. The civil engineers determine best use of the site and location, and this schedule is presented for building permit to be reviewed by the municipality. In regards to safety of the site, this is a joint responsibility. The community, administration, architects, and consultants, along with municipalities, contribute to the site safety. In the case of Marigold parking, there were no concerns from any of the initial community consultations, nor from the principal, vice principal, architects, or engineers. And as we have discussed previously in meetings, in the case of Marigold, there are multiple points to enter this site. So with regards to the question that was posed, I believe that is the response.
Thank you, Superintendent Whitten. Was there anything else from facility staff, Superintendent, that they wanted to add, or are we good?
We're good, thanks.
Okay, perfect. Okay, thanks very much. All right, folks, we also have next on our agenda a number of public disclosure of in-camera items in the way of various reports. You'll see them at G of the agenda. We've got G. Let's just be very specific here. We got G1 through G6, and they're from meetings from June to October. Now at H, do we have any new, we don't have any new business, but do we have any notice of motions? I have not received any, but I just want to check in with my colleagues about whether there's any notice of motions anyone would like to move from the floor tonight. Okay, hearing none, we have reached that time for adjournment. May I have a mover to adjourn? Thank you, Trustee Mabobi, and a seconder, Trustee Gagnon. All those in favor of adjournment with a show of hands. And that is unanimous. Thank you, folks. Take good care. Happy Halloween. Be safe. Have fun.